In this video, I'll be going over section problems A. I'm expecting that you guys have the section problems open with you, so I'm not going to necessarily draw everything. But please refer to the paper as I do the problems. So first, number 1. The problem says, in rabbits, the dominant allele capital B causes black fur and the recessive allele little b causes brown fur. So I'll write that down. Big B equals black and little b equals brown. Whoops. Brown. Okay. So the next part says, for an independently assorting gene, the dominant allele big R causes long fur and the recessive allele little r short fur. So I have it sorted out. Big B is black, little b is brown, big R is long, little r is short. A homozygous rabbit with long black fur is crossed with a rabbit with short brown fur. So let's figure this out. Homozygous rabbit with long black fur. Homozygous, we know, means it has two of the same allele. So parent 1 is homozygous for long black fur. So long and black means big B, big R, right? Homozygous. And it's crossed with a rabbit with short brown fur. So short brown fur, we know for a recessive allele to show, it has to be homozygous for both. So it's implicitly saying that it's homozygous for the recessive alleles. It just doesn't have to tell us that explicitly, because we know it shows the recessive trait, so it must be homozygous. Little b, little r. We cross these two. The question is, okay, and the F1 offspring are then intercrossed. So let's figure out what the F1 is. Let's see. Let me label this. This is the parent generation. F1. Let's figure out what the F1 genotype is. We know that this parent, the red one, has to give a big B because that's all it has. There's a 100% chance it passes a big B and a 100% chance it passes a big R. Second parent, we know there's a 100% chance that it passes a little b, and there's a 100% chance that it passes a little r, because it doesn't have either of the dominant. So let's write that down. Its phenotype must be big B, little b, big R, little r. And I'm using colors to specify which parent it came from, but it's not really important, just to help you guys see. And then those are crossed with themselves. So crossed with other F1 generation ones. Big B, little b, big R, little r. Okay, so now we're at the last sentence of the question. In the F2 generation, what proportion of the rabbits with long black fur will be homozygous for both genes? So to solve this problem, I'm going to first bring back the point, the important equation. The probability of some event happening is the number of outcomes in which it happens divided by the total possible outcomes. It's a key equation to know throughout the entire course. So in this problem, it's essentially asking what's the probability of, I won't say P, I'll say it's asking what the probability of homozygous out of all of the long black furs. So the probability of it would be the number of homozygous. This is messy handwriting, but it's the number of homozygous divided by the total of not all offspring, but specifically the total number of long black fur. It specifically says that's what we're looking at. So to solve this problem, we have to find out how many different homozygous genotypes there are, divided by the total number of genotypes that result in long black fur. Homozygous, this one should be hopefully pretty simple to figure out. We know that this parent, I'm going to make this one, blue and this one purple. So the blue parent can either give a big B or little b. There's a 50% chance of each, right? So we know that for it to be homozygous, it must get the big B. So there's a, let's say 1/2. There's a 1/2 chance of getting big B. And it has to get big R, which between big R and little r, there's also a 1/2 chance. And then for this parent, it can either get big B or little b, but we want the big B, which is a 1/2 chance. And it also needs the big R, which is also a 1/2 chance. So the overall probability of this happening is all 4 of these cases have to happen, which is, what color do I want? I'll do this color. So that means 1 over 2 times 2 is 4 times 2 times 2 is 16. So 1 over 16 probability that it'll be homozygous for each. Or the main part of this that I'm finding, there's one possible outcome out of the 16 total that it's, so I'll just, yeah. So the answer is 1. That's the numerator of whatever our answer is going to be. Now we have to find the total number of long black. How can this happen? So we know that we have 2 alleles, or we have 2 genes, B and R. For B to be the dominant black, it has to be either big B, or I'll use the right colors. It has to be big B, it's purple, big B, right? It has to receive big B from both parents, or it could be big B, little b, right? It could receive the dominant allele from this parent and the recessive allele from this parent, and it'll still be black. Or it could receive little b, big B, the recessive allele from this parent and the dominant allele from this parent. All 3 of these possible outcomes result in black fur. Now we do the same thing in terms of long hair, because that's the other thing we're looking for. It could either get big R from this parent and get big R from the other parent, or it could get big R from this parent and get little r from this parent. That's also valid. Or it can get little r from this parent and big R from this parent. All 3 of these are valid. That means 3 total types that can, 3 total possible outcomes to get long hair. Multiply these together because we want both black and long. Gets 9 total possible children, or offspring, that are both long and black. So the answer is 1 over 9. 1 homozygous for all 3 traits, divided by 9 total long black offspring. In my opinion, this is the most simple way of solving this. You could also do this by doing a 4x4 Punnett square, but it's a big waste of time, realistically. And especially on test day, you need to be able to do these problems relatively fast. Yeah. So now, we'll go a little lower. Number 2. For this problem, I'm not going to be copying down the big diagram, so please refer to that as I'm going through it, because I'm assuming that you guys have it open. So question 2 states, in tomatoes, 2 alleles of one gene determine the phenotype of purple versus green stems, and 2 alleles of a separate independently assorting gene determine the phenotype of cut versus potato leaves. The table below gives the number of progeny in each phenotypic category from 5 separate matings of tomato plants. Using these data to determine A, which alleles are dominant. I'll start with this. So we know that we have two categories. We have color, and then the options are purple and green. And the other gene we have is leaf type. So I'll say leaf. And the options are cut and potato. So the first part is saying, given the table, figure out which allele for each of these genes is dominant and which is recessive. So first I'll look at color. We want to see which one's dominant, which one's recessive between purple and green. And as we look through the data, there's a couple things that you want to look for. First off, in general, for an allele to be dominant, typically you want to see that its frequency with respect to the other allele is at least 50%. It'll usually either be 3 to 1 or 1 to 1. It'll either be 50-50 or 3 to 1. The other thing to look out for is the dominant allele should always appear as long as it shows up in the parents. But if we end up with some allele that shows up 0 times, there's a very good chance that it's the recessive allele. You could review your notes to kind of see why that is, but those are things to look out for. So first, for color. Well, right off the bat, 2 matings stand out for this section A in general. Matings 3 and matings 4. Mating 4 and mating 3 both have some amount of zeros, which those should catch your eye. For color, we want to see one where purple versus green for the same type of leaf cut, we want to see if one of the colors has 0. So looking at mating 3, we see that purple cut versus green cut, the first column and the third column out of the 4 offspring columns, we see that purple cut has offspring but green cut doesn't. For purple potato and green potato in that same row, we see purple potato has offspring but green potato doesn't. From this we can infer that purple is the dominant allele and green is the recessive allele. Hopefully that makes sense, but in short, we see that purple exists when green doesn't, given the same exact leaf cut, or leaf shape. Now for leaf, we can look at mating 4. We see that purple cut versus purple potato, purple cut has some offspring, but purple potato doesn't. And green cut versus green potato, we see green cut has offspring versus green potato doesn't. So for the same given color, cut has offspring but potato doesn't. This also implies cut is dominant and potato is recessive. So now that's part A, and that is the correct answer. Is purple is dominant to green, cut is dominant to potato. Now for part B, what are the most likely genotypes for the parents in each cross? Looking at the first cross, right off the bat we should notice, what I personally do is I look for any recessive phenotypes. A recessive phenotype, remember, automatically implies that the genotype is homozygous recessive. So, let's see, I'll label this. So for mating 1, I'll do it like that. Mating 1, we have purple cut, I'm just going to shorten it, crossed with green cut. Right off the bat, let's see what we know about the phenotypes. We know that this parent shows the dominant phenotype for both, which means for both traits A and B, it must have at least one dominant allele. We don't know what the second allele is, but we know at least one of its alleles must be dominant. So I'll write A blank B blank. We'll figure out the rest later. This second parent, we see that the color gene is recessive, which automatically means it must be homozygous recessive for this gene. This one, it says it has a dominant phenotype, so we know that it has at least one dominant allele. We don't know what the second allele is, though. Now we can look at the data. We see that for every single type of offspring, both purple and green, as well as both cut and potato, there's some range of offspring, and we see a clear, maybe clear, but a pretty clear 3-to-1 ratio between cut and potato. Just the fact that we see some number of every single type of offspring implies that for the leaf type, since both of these have the dominant allele, but we see some number of both dominant and recessive, they must both be heterozygous for this trait. Right? Otherwise, if even one of them was homozygous dominant, then none of the offspring would have the recessive trait. They would all have the dominant phenotype. The same logic goes for color. If this one was homozygous dominant, none of the offspring would be green. However, we do have green offspring despite this purple parent, which means it must be heterozygous. So the genotypes of the parents in mating 1 are big A, big B, crossed with little a, big B, little b. For number 2, again, starting with the same logic, so we have purple cut crossed with purple potato. So this parent, it has the dominant phenotype for both. So I'm going to write A blank, big B blank, because we know it has at least one of each dominant allele. And it's crossed with a parent that has purple color, so it has at least one dominant allele. The second one we don't know. And it has potato-shaped leaves, which we know is recessive. So automatically we know it must have little b. Now we can look at the data to try to fill in these 3 blanks. Let's see. So for the color, we see that we have some offspring of both colors, both purple and green. If this parent, oh whoops, I put in a P here, this should be an A. If either parent was homozygous dominant, none of the offspring would have the recessive trait. Since we do see offspring with recessive trait, that means both parents must be heterozygous if they have the dominant trait as their phenotype, but they do have offspring that don't have it. Same goes with leaf cut. If this one was homozygous dominant, none of the offspring would have the potato-shaped leaves. But we do see some that have it, which means this one must have been heterozygous. 3. Oh, so in summary, number 2, the parents are big A, big B, crossed with big A, little b. The third one, we have purple cut crossed with green cut. Same logic, purple, so it must have at least one of the dominant allele, and cut, so it must have at least one of the dominant allele. Here we have green color, which means it must be homozygous recessive for A, and again cut, so it must have at least one of the dominant allele. Now we can look at the data. We should first jump to noticing that there's a 0 in both of the green columns. So even though this parent is homozygous recessive for the color, so even though this parent is green, none of the offspring are green. This implies that this parent must have been homozygous dominant. This could have also just by chance happened if this was heterozygous, but that would have been extremely unlikely to have absolutely no children that are green. The only way it's likely to happen is if this parent is homozygous dominant. Now when we look at cut, we see both types of cut being, when we look at leaf type, we see both cut and potato shaped. which means that since both of these are showing the dominant trait, they must both be heterozygous, otherwise we would have only had one of them showing. We would have only had cut showing. So yeah, same logic as here. So the answer here is big A, big B, little b, crossed with little a, big B, little b. For number 4, we have purple cut crossed with green potato. Purple cut, we know it has at least one dominant allele of each. And green potato, it's showing both of the recessive traits. So we know this one's homozygous recessive for both. Now let's look at the data. We see that there's no potato leaf plants. If there's absolutely no potato leaf plants, that implies that this parent must be homozygous dominant in terms of leaf size. Otherwise, we would have had some number of the recessive trait showing. For color, we do see both purple and green offspring, which means this one must have been heterozygous, otherwise we would have only seen purple. So this one, it's big A, big B, crossed with little a, little b, little b. Number 5, we have a purple potato leaf crossed with green cut. We know purple, so it has at least one dominant allele. Potato, so it must be homozygous recessive for trait B. Crossed with green, so it must be homozygous recessive for color. And it has cut leaves, so it has to have at least one dominant allele. Now looking at the data, we see that there's some number of each type of offspring, which means that this must be heterozygous. Otherwise, if this was homozygous for color, there wouldn't be any green offspring. Using the same logic, since we see both types of leaf sizes, this one must be heterozygous for leaf type. Otherwise, we would have only seen cut leaves in the offspring. This one, it's nice that we're able to do it with this type of logic, because if you looked at the numbers, you might be thrown off that purple cut has a smaller number than purple potato, even though cut is the dominant allele with respect to potato. This, it could just be attributed to basic probability. It could have just been an unlikely but still possible occurrence, and it could have been that the sample size was too small. Either way, based on this logic that we went through, we're guaranteed that this must have been the genotypes. So the answer is big A, little b, crossed with little a, big B, little b. So hopefully this made sense, but this should be the entire answer for part B of number 2. Now I'll move on to number 3. Number 3. Let's see. Part A. So number 3 in general says, if you roll 2 6-sided dice, what is the probability of obtaining the following outcomes? The first is asking about rolling a 2 and a 3. So again, using that same equation that I always say, probability of some event happening is the number of outcomes of it. I'll say number A. I don't feel like writing it out. Number of outcomes in which that happens divided by the total possible number of outcomes. First off, for all of these problems, for every part of number 3, we can quickly find this denominator. The total number of outcomes, we know that we're rolling 2 die. Each die has 6 possible outcomes. So the total number of outcomes is 36 for every single one of these problems. Just a nice side note to have. So for every problem, all we really have to find is this numerator. So part A, rolling a 2 and a 3. Well, we could think of, we could either roll a 2, let's see, we could roll a 2 on the first roll. Note that these aren't denominators, these are just notes, so don't think these are fractions, just look at the numbers on top. So we could have either rolled a 2 which that can happen once. There's only one way of happening, rolling a 2 on the first die, and then rolling a 3 on the second die. So that's one outcome. Or we could have rolled a 3 on the first die and a 2 on the second die. Right? Both of these would be valid for the basic statement 2 and 3. It could have either been 2 first and then 3, or it could have been 3 first and then 2. Note, none of these are denominators. All we're looking at are the numerators. So 1 times 1 plus 1 times 1 for 2 and then 3, or 3 and then 2. That's 2 possible outcomes. So then 2 divided by 36, again, ignore all these aren't denominators, just heads up. 2 out of the 36 possible outcomes equals 1/18. So there's a 1 in 18 probability of rolling a 2 and a 3. That would be rolling a 2 and then a 3, or rolling a 3 and then a 2. 1/18. Okay, part B. It's saying rolling a 6 and a 6. Well, so we have 2 die rolls. The first one must be a 6. So there's only one possible outcome for the first die. And the second one must be a 6. That means that there's only one possible outcome that this happens. We might think, why don't we use the same logic as we did here, where we did the 2 reversed ways? Because if it's 6 and 6, there's only one way. You can't flip the 2. So there's only one option for each, which means there's only one total outcome. So the answer would be 1 out of 36. Now for question C. At least 1 6. So anytime you see the words at least, you want to think the inverse rule. The inverse rule is probability of A not happening, or A complement, is 1 minus the probability of A. So it says the probability of at least 1 6. We can also think of this as 1 minus the probability of not getting any 6s at all, because that's the reverse of getting at least 1 6. The probability of no 6s, or not probability, I'm just going to say the number of outcomes where we have no 6. The first die, there's 5 possible things, 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. And the second die, also there's only 5 possible options. So there's 25 total possible outcomes that result in not having a 6 at all. So the probability of no 6 is 25 over 36. So using this equation, the probability of at least 1 6 is 1 minus 25 over 36, which equals 11 over 36. Okay, so now part D. 2 of the same number, 2 1s or 2 2s or 2 3s, etc. Let's see, so for this one we want to use the rule of probability, where independent events, if we have an option between them, we add their probabilities. If it's this or that, A or B, we can add the probability of A plus the probability of B. So for this one, we have 6 possible options. We can either roll 2 1s, 2 2s, 2 3s, 2 4s, 2 5s, or 2 6s. So if we roll 2 1s, so I'll say 1s, the first die has to be a 1, and the second die also has to be a 1. So that's 1 outcome. Rolling 2 2s, the first die has to be a 2, and the second die also has to be a 2. That's 1 outcome. Keep doing this until 6s. The first die has to be a 6, and the second die also has to be a 6. So there's 1 possible outcome. So each of these has 1 possible outcome, And there's 6 different scenarios that we want. So 6 times 1 is 6. Out of the 36 possible outcomes means there's a 1 in 6 chance that this happens. So that's the answer for part D, 1 over 6. Question E, an even number on both dice. So we roll 2 die. The first one can either be a 2, 4, or a 6. So there's 3 possible outcomes. The second die can also be 2, 4, or 6. So there's 3 possible outcomes. The total number of outcomes that work are 3 times 3, which is 9. 9 over the 36 possible total outcomes equals 1 out of 4. A 1/4 chance that we roll 2 even numbers. The last question, F, is saying the probability of an even number on at least 1 die. So again, just like in part C, we're going to do the reverse rule. The probability of an even number on at least 1 die is 1 minus the probability of no even numbers on either die. What is no even number? Not an even number is an odd number. So it's also known as 1 minus the probability of both being odd. So probability of both of them being odd, we roll 2 die. The first one is 1, 3, or 5. So there's 3 options. The second one can only also be 1, 3, or 5. So there's 9 total possible outcomes where both are odd. So neither is even. Then 1 minus that, 9 total outcomes divided by 36 total outcomes is a 9 in 36 chance that neither is even. 1 minus 9 over 36 we just saw is 1/4. So 1 minus 1/4, fourth is 3/4. So the answer for this one is 3/4. As can be guessed, there's probably a bunch of different ways to do each of these problems, but this is what I personally found to be either the easiest and or the most efficient way of doing them.